Hi, I'm Larissa with Beekeeping Made Simple, and welcome to my cooking channel. Just kidding, you don't want to learn to cook from me. We're going to be feeding our bees syrup. This is all about feeding your bees syrup in the fall, which is a little bit different than feeding your bees other times of year. We're going to make some syrup, we're going to make a feeder together, and then we're going to go put it out into the beehives. It is mid-September, September 16th to be exact, and it is still in the 70s Fahrenheit outside in the daytime. Now once it is about 57-ish Fahrenheit, 14 degrees Celsius, that's when those temperatures and below, the bees will be inside the hive starting to form a loose cluster. But while it is still warmer than that out, the bees will be leaving the hive in search for food. I just opened my hives 2 days ago, and the population is good. The frames are covered in bees within their brood box. However, the hive is light and there is not a lot of food in the hive. So when people talk about what kind of syrup to make, is it 1 part sugar to 1 part water, what we call a 1-to-1, 2 parts sugar to 1 part water, 2-to-1? To answer that question, what I think about is, what are we trying to do? This video is brought to you by BEEZZIT, bee-themed gifts with a cause. If you're like me, you don't just keep bees, you love bees. With BEEZZIT products, you can show your bee love with bee-themed apparel, jewelry, garden decor, kitchen items, and more. I fell in love with this little honey pot. It brings a smile to my face every time I use it. You may recognize these little garden bees from my videos. They look adorable inside and outside. The t-shirts, hats, and socks are super soft, comfortable, and well made. BEEZZIT stuff is adorable and so unique. Best of all, BEEZZIT cares about bees. When you make a purchase from BEEZZIT.com, a portion of the proceeds goes to support bee conservation organizations. So bring some bee love to your home and support the bees. Go to BEEZZIT.com and use coupon code Larissa5 for 5% off. For a limited time only, BEEZZIT has a 4-for-1 deal. Check out the video description below to learn more. If your hive's population is low, or you're seeing your queen not laying anymore, but she should be, mid-September, it's still 70s, 80s, she should be laying, you want to give them a 1-to-1 syrup because you want to mimic nectar. When you give the bees what seems to be nectar to them, that gives them the impression that there is a nectar flow going on. The nectar flow going on, resources are coming in, and therefore the queen can lay. You want lots of fat winter bees to cluster up when it gets cold out to get that hive through the winter. So if you are seeing your queen not laying, or like very minimal developing brood, especially in the eggs and larva stage, then you might want to give them a 1-to-1 syrup. However, if your queen is laying, but my hive is still on the light side, and when I give it a little tilt, or when I just pick up that box, the box is light, and I would like to bulk up my bees and give them more food. So I am going to make them a 2-to-1. And it's up to you to decide what you think is best for your bees and to change from 1-to-1 to 2-to-1 when you think it's necessary. And of course, you do not have to feed your bees. Many people do not. But if you think your hive is lacking, doesn't have enough food, or you're not sure if they have enough food, I recommend feeding them, especially their first couple of years, to ensure that you get your bees through the winter. And then we can pivot and we can work as beekeepers to fine-tune our beekeeping tasks and how we care for our bees so that they get healthier and healthier each year. And we have to treat less and feed less year to year. But your first few years, I can't stress enough how important it is to just keep them alive, and then we can work towards better beekeeping, healthier beekeeping practices from there. All right, we're first going to make our syrup. We need a big pot. Does not have to be a 50-year-old pot from your grandmother, but can be if you like. We need our sugar. This sugar is a 25-pound bag. I have fed my bees more this first year in Pennsylvania than I did in all of the 11 years I kept bees in Hawaii. I've also found, I got these gallon jugs for water at Target, and I find them incredibly helpful for storing syrup in my refrigerator. A spoon, measuring cup. We are measuring by volume, not weight. So a measuring cup, you don't actually need a measuring cup, you just need a large container because you just need to do the same thing with each. You don't have to do a certain amount of cups. And there are things we call supplements that people will add to syrup. This is called Honey Bee Healthy, and this is, they call it a feeding stimulant. It has essential oils in it. I used to think that this was good for the bees. It helped them digest it and prevent nosema. But in fact, the primary thing that this does is actually extend the shelf life of your syrup. So when you're making syrup in the springtime, when it's might be kind of warmer out already, or when they're not getting really needing a lot, the hive is small, they don't need a lot of syrup, they just want to prevent them from starving and encourage them to grow a little bit sooner. This is helpful, but right now my bees are eating their syrup fast, and without this, your syrup will last about a week. This is an amino booster, and then there's also pollen that some people will add to their feed. I do not give my bees pollen at this time. There is a ton of pollen coming in, and that's why it's very important not just to ask other beekeepers what to do or to watch videos like this, but to spend time just observing your entrance. Wear the valence stuff even though you're not opening it, but just sit by the entrance and watch what they're doing. If a lot of pollen is coming in, if you're seeing a lot of pollen in the hive, I do not think it is necessary to give your bees more pollen in the fake form. Also, small hive beetles will start to lay their eggs and then hatch into worms and really go crazy over those pollen patties. I've seen it a lot in Hawaii, and in this time of year, the small hive beetle population is starting to ramp up quite a bit. So if you are seeing small hive beetles in your hive, or you live in a warmer climate like the southern states, you're in Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Hawaii, do not give them pollen unless you think that they really need it, and give them a tiny little pieces and keep an eye on it because the bees do not guard this pollen. And that's it. So let's make some syrup. Now for a size pot like this, I am going to put in 8 cups of water. Now you don't have to boil the water, I'm just trying to get it hot fast. And what I found is that if I don't put it in a pot and warm up the water considerably, the sugar, it just takes a while to really get it to dissolve. And sometimes I think it's dissolved, but then I go back to the container the next day once it's been in the refrigerator and a lot of sugar has just clumped to the bottom. So with a 1-to-1 syrup, just adding some hot water from the tap and mixing sugar seems sufficient. But when I'm doing a 2-to-1 thick syrup, I like to heat up my water to really dissolve the sugar in it much better. Okay, now my water is hot. It's not boiling. I don't even see any bubbles coming up, but it's nice and hot. And I'm going to add in the first 4 cups of sugar and give it a good stir. You don't want to use brown sugar, powdered sugar. It's best used just a plain white sugar, cane sugar. You don't want to be giving the vitamins, minerals, and other things that might not be good for them. So it's best to give them something that's everything's been destroyed in it. There's no nutritional value other than its sugar. And so this is now 8 cups of sugar that I am adding to the 8 cups of water in my pot. If you want to give them a 1-to-1 syrup, then after you're done stirring this, then you're done. Okay, once you are done making your 2-to-1 syrup, you're going to put it into a container. If it's still too warm to go in your container, then let it cool for a little bit. I just take the same measuring cup and use that to pour it in. Funnels work well. I will warn you, when this hardens, it is a pain in the butt to get off of kitchen counters and stovetops. It's like a rock. How much feed the bees will need and how often you have to feed them is a common question that I get. In the springtime, each of my hives ate less than a gallon of honey each over the course of their first month. I think I took it out before they were even in the hive for a month. But I put feed in my hives on Saturday, and on Monday, it was almost all gone. So there's a few things that come into play. How big is the hive? Is there food for them to gather? Is there flowers for them to go to? And maybe even the time of year comes into play. They might be a little bit more eager to gather food really fast in the fall compared to the springtime. As well as the feeder. If you have a feeder that's open with lots of bees, if 50 bees can get to this feeder at once, then they're going to deplete the syrup in that a lot faster than if you have a feeder that's in an enclosed container with just 5 little holes at the top. That's only 5 bees that can get to that feed at a time. And you're going to see a big crowd of bees around it waiting to get to this feeder. I want to show you how to make a feeder because it's actually quite simple. And if you have a feeder that I'm going to recommend not using and you're like, oh no, Larissa said don't use this feeder, well, that's okay. Just go to a local store, buy a mason jar and make one for yourself. What you need is a glass jar and you need a lid with a gasket on it to seal it up. So the mason jars work really well. You can use 16-ounce jars. You can use the 32-ounce jars. It is up to you. Inside one of my hives, I'll show you a stand to hold one of these because these are a little tippy. You don't want to just stick this on top of the frames inside your beehive. If you are just going to turn your jar upside down and put it on inside your hive, then I would recommend one with a wide mouth. What I do is I take one of the nails that is used to put a frame together for my beehive. And then we are going to take the lid and we are going to put it on top of that outside part that screws it on. Then you want to take a hammer. You can laugh if you like, but I can't find my hammer. My son seems to have stolen it smashing rocks. So I'm using mallet. And you're just going to poke a hole into the lid. You're going to do this a bunch of times because each one of these holes is going to be a space that a honeybee can put her proboscis into to get syrup from. Then we'll put that on the jar and we'll bring this out with us to the hives. Now let's go feed our bees, and I'm going to show you the 3 different ways I am feeding my bees in these 3 different hives. First, I'm going to put my gloves on because the bees are mad. This is not a happy time of year for them. They are overly defensive of the hive and aggressive. I am going to use the feeder I just made for this one. This is the wide mouth 16-ounce jar. And this is my keeper's hive. For the keeper's hive, these jars work well because I am feeding inside of a honey super, which is a medium-sized box. For the medium-sized box, I'm going to need the shorter jars. So you see in this hive, what I've done is put a queen excluder on, and then I put my wide mouth jars right on top of that. Gives the bees easy access to get to the feeder holes. You want to do this fast, try not to spill so that we don't attract too much robbing. What you want to do is fill your jars up all the way. It's really important you not fill your jar up halfway or part of the way. It has to be pretty close to the top. You don't want it overflowing when you put the cap on, but the key to these so that they do not leak is that it creates this vacuum seal. Next, we're moving on to my insulated hive. And For this one, I have the 32-ounce jars inside. They don't have a wide mouth lid. This holds a gallon of syrup, and you'll see it has this. This I got from Dadant. I'll put the link in the video description. And it holds the jars and it elevates it so you can use that inner cover. I kind of like not filling it up with all four because you see there's bees inside here. And when you fill it up with all four, the bees can't get back into the box. Just sometimes when you're putting this feed in, especially if you're replacing it, you take the jar out, a whole bunch of bees come out with that jar, and now you have a bunch of bees inside this box. So I prefer to actually leave that one hole empty so I don't have to deal with bees chasing them out of this box. But again, with the other feeder we made, when you fill up these jars, you need to fill them up all the way. When you first put it in, there's going to be a little bit of dripping, but it stops shortly after. If you're concerned you didn't do it right and your jar is going to be dripping in your hive, you can hang it in your kitchen with a bowl underneath. You know, just put 2 little blocks of wood, or, oh look, there's condensation in my beehive already. I like these jar feeders because everything is contained inside, especially if you choose to put a supplement, amino bee boost. Those things can especially attract robbing. And so when this jar has a lid on it, the sugar can get out, but I think this thing does not encourage robbing within your beehive the way open feeders do. It's also easy to make and easy to store. The feeders I really don't like are the ones that go at the entrance, because that's really easy for robbers to get to. I'm not a huge fan of the frame feeders either, because it's really nice to be able to put feed into your hive without disrupting the bees inside the hive. And so you can keep that inner cover on, you can keep that warmth inside, because the bees are trying to keep the brood at a nice warm temperature, and even in the 70s it's considerably cooler than what the bees wanted, and so you're not disrupting them. And if you have to change this out often, that can really start to bother the bees. But I will show you another feeder that I have. It also goes in the upper section of the beehive, but it is not enclosed like these jars. I've also tried, it's similar in style to this, but blue, and holds a gallon of syrup. What I like about it is that it does hold a gallon, but I prefer these because in the springtime, I don't need to feed the bees a gallon of syrup. They don't need that much syrup, and you have to fill the container up to the top, or else it won't create that vacuum seal and it will leak. It says it on the container, and there's a little line at which you have to pour it into. So I don't like using it, because now, yes, I will fill up a gallon, but in the springtime, no, I don't need that much. The other thing I don't like about it is that although it holds a gallon, it has this tiny little spout at the bottom that has like just a few holes in it. I think maybe 6. And so with these jars, you know, I poked 10 holes in each jar. I have 3 or 4 jars in there. That's a lot of access points for the bees. That feeder, although the population is considerably higher than my other 2 hives, and the bees are very active, they aren't going through the feed even half as fast as the bees are with these. And I did double check, and they are not leaking. And I also like this feeder. It holds a lot, and you don't have to, doesn't really matter how much you put in here. You can throw a little bit in, you can throw a lot in. Tons of bees are accessing it. At first I wasn't sure if they were going to find it, because there is an inner cover below this. So I sprinkled, the bees come up through here. This is open. Bees come up through here to get to the feed. And then these racks float. The only thing I don't like about it, it looks like a lot of the moisture's evaporated from some of the syrup, and now there's just some sugar crystals left, is that when there are bees standing on it, you can't like really quickly throw this in the hive. You have to be a little slow so you're not drowning the bees. You know, the last feed I did, I filled this compartment up halfway. When I checked on it, it was totally empty and there were 2 dead bees. You probably won't see any dead bees when you are feeding your bees with the feeders that you invert, like the jars. Because there's nothing for them to drown in. The ones that are these big open pools, you're gonna see some dead bees. But I mean, that's a pretty, 2 dead bees isn't so bad. I was a little reluctant to use this feeder in the fall because of robbing, but since I am not seeing signs of robbing in this hive, I'm going to continue using it. But that's the thing with beekeeping. You try something and you just have to watch it. You have to keep an eye on it, and if it doesn't work, then change something. And at first I wasn't sure if the bees would find this, so I did sprinkle a little bit of syrup, you know, just like right here, so that you could see it up here and along the walls. And it looks like the bees had no problem finding it. Looks like I'm gonna have to make more syrup so that I can give these guys more food. This is one other feeder I have. It's called the Ceracell, and you fill it up just like the wooden feeder, but the bees can't just get to the inside. They get to it by means of the corners and get to that little bit of feed there and through up here. And they can stick their proboscis through these little holes to get to it. The first time I used it, it went great. And then the second time, there were a bunch of dead, wet bees in this area and in some of the corners. So I'm not exactly sure what happened then. And the wooden one I prefer in some ways, but also it is kind of stained from mold. So this one's nicer in that you can wash it. But I did see more dead bees drowned in this. Now that we're feeding our bees, you really want to keep an eye on the robbing. I have a link in the video description all about robbing, prevention, how to stop it, signs of it. But real fast, you're going to just see aggressive, more defensive behavior from the bees. You're going to see bees stinging each other on the lid, on the landing board, on the ground. You might see dead bees on the ground outside your hive. Little bits of beeswax on the landing board. A high-pitched buzzing sound and bees coming and going from the hive really fast, as opposed to bees standing around, hanging out, taking their time getting in and out of the hive. Those are some of the big signs of robbing. And you want to keep monitoring the feed and adding more as needed. You also want to keep your inspection short. Don't inspect more often than once a week, maybe even decrease the how often you're inspecting to every 10 days or 14 days. And just keep the inspections very short. Try not to leave frames outside, leaning against your hive while inspecting. A quiet box, which is an empty box that you can put your frame into while you're inspecting, is really helpful. If you can put an extra lid or a board on top, even better. We just don't want to bring attention to our beehives so that any other bees and wasps can smell them when the hive is open. Although it's not time for me to get ready to prepare my hive for winter, we have well over a month before that. I have decreased my entrance, and if it is getting cooler out, your hives are consolidating, they don't need a full entrance. I recommend decreasing your entrance as well, especially if you're going to be putting food in your hive. And something I'm also doing is actually putting the insulation inside my telescoping outer cover. And that's something you can actually have on your hive year round, especially when it is really hot out, as well as when it's colder out, to help keep help the bees more easily regulate the temperature in their hive. After all, wild bees are usually in, you know, hollowed out trees and things that have much better insulation than the typical wooden boxes that we put our bees in. You do want to keep an eye on your mite levels. There are a ton of pollen one coming in this beehive. So cute, and I love to see that. It means that the queen is laying and that there is brood in here. You want to keep your mite levels low. If you're going to be going into a cold winter and you're going to be closing up your hive for winter, and then next month or two, you want your mite levels to be a 0 or a 1. It is the best case scenario for you. And mite levels can really start to get high fast because bees are robbing and they are just all coming in and out of each other's hives and all going to the same nectar sources, since there is a lot less for them. If you have a feeder that you really love, please leave it in the comments. You have further questions, leave them in the comments as well. Thanks for watching.